Evening, family. Hope you guys had a really good afternoon. Chance to relax. I want to welcome those who are visiting. We've had several visitors here today, and it was really a blessing. And those who are still with us, thank you for coming back and being a part of our evening gathering. I started this morning with a question. And the question was, what are you concerned about? And so we focused on answering that question by looking at Joshua and his life and a message that he delivered in Joshua chapter 23. And we'll continue on with that next Sunday morning. Tonight I want to ask you another question. As a matter of fact, it's a little series of questions. What is your purpose? What is your role? What is your value? What is your purpose? What is your role? What is your value? Now, to help to answer these questions, let's just go to God first. And let's see how he sees this question applied to us. Because our Lord does have a purpose for each and every one of us in our life. As a matter of fact, he has a role for each and every one of us in life. As a matter of fact, those roles vary depending upon whether you're a mom or a dad or a husband or a wife or brother or a sister, a child, a brother or sister in Christ. We have different roles within this congregation. The function of the body of Christ here, there are different roles within it. And the same can be said when it comes to connected to God and the idea of purpose. We all have an overarching purpose. It's to love him with all that we are and to serve him with all that we are and to be about his purpose, seeking and saving lost souls and loving one another in doing so. And what about value? How does he value you? Do you know there isn't a number large enough to describe what that means? That God values you so much that there isn't a number that you can bring out to say, well, God values me and my life this much. That number doesn't exist. There isn't an image that you could paint to try to grasp how much God values you. You could try to capture the fullness of the universe that we live in, and it still wouldn't be large enough to capture the value that God has in his love for you. Now we can start to at least taste a little bit of it as we view that we are created out of all things in his image. He values us so much that he made us in his image. He values us so much that he wants us, as he created us, to live with him for eternity. Put a number on that. And then, even so, along the way, we mess things up and get in the way of his purpose and his plan and his role to have us with great value living with him forever. We mess that up, but then he goes above and beyond and he puts together a plan with a purpose because he values us so much that he has his son killed. Amen. I mean, talk about value. Even when we mess up. And so I want you to just think, just in that first sense, about God and his purpose and his plan and his role for you in life and the value that he sees you as having in his. Now we'll take it to a little bit closer to where we are right now, application. By what exactly is your role and purpose here? And how much value do you think you have in the lives of others? I think that most of us would be shocked if we actually had the opportunity to see the reality of the value that we have in other people's lives. I think we'd be shocked to see just how much value we have in other people's lives. I mean, you mean something to people, so many people. It goes beyond the realm of what any of us can truly comprehend about just how much value you have in the lives of others. And I know every once in a while we try to express how valuable people are in our lives by exchanging gifts, by giving some sort of trinket. And let's face it, there isn't anybody in this room who's loved and valued a wife who's been able to express with a gift just how much value that wife has in your life, right? Isn't that true? There isn't anything that you could give her that would express just how much she means to you. But you try and you receive it, I think, in knowing that this exchange of a love gift is an expression of the vastness of his love for me. And even then, it's so hard to comprehend. And so just understand that kids or wives or parents or friends, when you get something from somebody, a compliment, a back rub, a set of earrings, know that that token and that trinket is in exchange for them just trying to let you know in some sort of way you mean so much more to them that they can't express it with anything that would really fully express it, but they're attempting to at least acknowledge it with that gift. Now, you may be like me, you poor person. It's been very transparent many times, at least for me, in public and private forums. I struggle with self-worth. Always have. And because of that, I really struggle with then feeling that I have value. So then when I am blessed with people in my life that do value me in their life, and they really do try to express it with words and actions, please forgive me. I don't do a very good job at accepting the value exchange that you have from you to me. Forgive me. And I mean that sincerely. I struggle with it. And maybe you do too. But see, the reality is, and I know it is based upon the studies that I've done this past week, is that I know that I'm loved, and I know that I'm valued, and I know that you are too. And I know that my role and that my purpose and that my value has a great effect on many, many people, and so does yours. As a matter of fact, you and I have value in people's lives that we've never met. Nor perhaps will we ever, short of maybe in heaven. That there are people that are years from now going to gain some wonderful things because of your purpose and your role and the value that you have that you pass on to others that they may receive later on in life. And they're blessed because of it. You see, you have value even in the future of people's lives. But what about when times get tough? When hard times set in and it just seems like everybody's against you, or at least some are. And in that moment, then you feel, well, devalued. I would think that some of you have been there before. And maybe even wondering, well, what's going on? I mean, why is God allowing this to happen? What's happening? I mean, I really thought that I was valued by him, and I really thought I had a purpose and a role, and I really thought that I was valued in the lives of others, but now I just feel so devalued. What then? How do we move forward then? I mean, what exactly do we do when we face things like that in life? We don't feel much value at all. Well, I'm glad you asked. As a matter of fact, I'm really glad you asked, because this is going to be a series that's going to last for weeks. And if I get a hold of it too long, it could last for years. You see, we're going to go to the life of Joseph. There's so much to learn from this man. You see, he's a man just like you and I, a human being just like us. And he has a purpose, and he has a role, and he has tremendous value in the sight of God. But talk about a person who was mistreated, a person who was abused, a person who was falsely accused, falsely imprisoned. Talk about a person who went through so much. And you know what we learn from him? A guy just like you and I? He forgives. What? He keeps a positive attitude. What? He restores. No way. And above all, he never wavers in his trust for God. Man, I've got so much to learn. Again, maybe you're not like me, but when you're talking about somebody who wrestles with things in life internally, and then you go through seasons of difficulties, it can have a deeper impact on somebody like myself than perhaps somebody like you. Or maybe like you. Or maybe it has an even deeper impact in your life than it would mine. Because you see, we're all unique individuals as we go through this journey of life, and we face various trials of height and depth and pain and weight. But along the way, what I want us to never forget is that your purpose and your role and your value in the eyes of God never changes. As a matter of fact, it's imperative that through the journey of the valleys of difficulty, that you never forget that you have value and a role and purpose even in the midst of the pain. Not easy to remember. Joseph does, though. So if you have not yet already, I would highly encourage you opening up your Bibles to the book of Genesis chapter 37. It is where our journey with Joseph will begin. What's interesting is the story of Joseph goes from chapter 37 all the way to chapter 50. You know, it's 50 chapters, and 13 of them is him. I mean, he's a pretty important person in the history of this amazing history book. And the lessons that we're going to learn from him over the next 16 years, I'm hoping will help all of us hone in on what our purpose and our role is, and give us that strength from realizing just how valued you are. Now, to get into his life, what we have to do is dive into his family's past, because it does make a difference. Joseph's dad is named Jacob. That's right. Jacob has another name. What's his other name? That's right. The 12 tribes of Israel come from, well, Jacob. Now, to get the 12 tribes of Israel, Jacob has a pretty colored past. He's got some times of great success and some times of great failure. He even spends time wrestling God. It gets things pulled out of socket. Gaining a pretty good limp, I'd imagine. And so now, to set up Joseph's life, we had to set up the history of the family past so that it leads into his life. Because let's face it, family connections and family life and family events and family relationships, family failures, family successes, family business, all has everything to do with passing that sort of idea and life on to an individual's future. Because we form, and we're part of forming the future of people's lives. That's one of the roles and purposes that we have when it comes to being a parent. That what happens in the household feeds into the lives and the minds of these young minds and these young lives, and then they take it, and then they work with it, and then they personalize it, and then it becomes their perspective of life. And it affects them for the rest of their life, which then affects others for the rest of their life. And so we have Jacob, and we know that he wrestles with God, and he must be a pretty dedicated hard worker. You see, there was an Uncle Laban, and he had a cousin, Rachel. She was fine. Yeah. And he wanted to marry her. Now, we're going to talk about marriage a couple times in this lesson, but we're not going to go into the depth of what this marriage stuff is, because those are all different lessons. Why we have cousins marrying cousins at this time, we'll get into that some other time. But you see, Jacob sees Rachel and he says, hey man, I'd like to marry her, Laban. How's that sound? He goes, sounds good, but you're going to have to work 7 years to get her. Man, she's worth it. He puts in 7 years, goes by like that. Comes down to the wedding day. You may kiss the bride. What? It's Leah, the sister. He worked 7 years and now he said the I do's to the wrong girl. Laban set him up, man. But he still wants Rachel. So Laban says what? Put in 7 more. Imagine how that would affect somebody's life. Where you dedicate your life in service and work to a guy because you love this person so much. And then you get to that place, that pinnacle, and you find out that he hosed you over. And now you got to do it again. But he does. 7 years, 14 in total. He marries Rachel. How many wives do you have now? Oh, that'll work out nice. Now, this is the second thing about marriage that we're not going to get into, polygamy. I'll let Allie handle that one. You're welcome, brother. For whatever reason, back in the days of the patriarchs, polygamy was in some sort of way accepted. And so now we have Jacob married to 2 women, and of course those 2 women just got along swimmingly. Oh, they did not. They argued and fought constantly. And when they weren't arguing and fighting, they were bargaining for Jacob's time in the evening. So Jacob becomes like this little ping pong ball. No, you're mine tonight. No, you're here with me tonight. 2 different rooms, 2 different households, 2 different wives, 2 different lives. They're not working out. He must hear it all the time. He's being pulled from one place to the next. He still has the family business to run. And his favorite, she's not having children. So you know what she decides? Part of the custom and tradition of the area. I'll give you my handmaid, Bildah, and you'll marry her. And then she will bear children for me. He now has 3 wives. Well, not to be outdone, Leah says, oh yeah, I got a handmaid too, Zilpah. You marry her, she gonna have kids too. He's now married to 4 wives, and they don't get along. And now there's a population explosion in the Jacob house. Rachel's still having trouble having kids. So now the babies are born and they start to grow, and we finally have Joseph born by Rachel, her first child. She then has a second child, Benjamin, but giving birth to Benjamin, she dies. Now Joseph doesn't have a mom. And the other moms don't like Rachel. She's gone now. How do you think they're going to treat him? Just think of the household that he's raised in. Think of the household these other 11 boys are raised in. And we don't know how many daughters. We know of at least one. We know that even one of the sons, the oldest son, goes and has an inappropriate relationship with his mother-in-law or stepmom. What? And then the sister, she gets treated inappropriately, kidnapped, and then treated inappropriately. And that family has to deal with that issue too. Talk about stuff, man. I mean, this is a highly dysfunctional family. And this is what Joseph is born into. I wonder how it affected everybody. I wonder what their disposition was toward one another. I wonder how the brothers all got along, including with Joseph. I wonder what kind of talk happened between the people. You know, kids hear talk, they pick up on signs pretty quickly. People do just in general. They pick up on body language and verbal stuff. And I just wonder what was said between the women toward one another, about the boys toward one another, about one another. I wonder what was said. And you see, that affects people. That adds layers to how people see one another. When one person speaks negatively of another person, even though that other person wasn't really there to defend themselves or to at least try to talk or at least represent themselves there, but then people start forming their own thoughts and opinions about what other people are based upon the naysayers. And you can imagine in that household, all the negative talk about so many things and so many people, how that formed the perspective of the people in that household. Could you imagine? And we find out as time goes on, it only gets worse because they don't see each other with loving eyes. They don't see each other in the household with respect. They see each other with judgment and anger and bitterness. That's what Joseph was raised in. Now, before we get too far down the road, I just want to remind you, most of you know who he is, Joseph is. How did he turn out like he did when he was surrounded by so much? I also want to flip the page just a little bit and say that I believe that part of the answer that Joseph has when dealing with his family is that he must have had some sort of recognition and insight that his family has a whole bunch of layers and they're twisted. And that they were influenced by so many things that weren't necessarily always correct. And that he had compassion and he had love and he had grace and he had mercy and he wanted what was best for his family, regardless of whether they wanted what was worst for him. And I guess what I'm trying to say is that we're very much like them too. You see, there's so much that we don't know about one another. We all have so many layers, and some of us have more twisted layers than others based upon where we've come from, who we've been raised by, the things that we've heard, the things that we've experienced, the things that we've done, both good and bad, the things that were done both good and bad to us, whatever sort of education whatever neighborhood we were raised in. All of these things add layers of how we perceive ourselves and how we perceive the world around us and people. And so maybe, just maybe, having to step back for a moment and have a set of eyes of, well, like Joseph, compassion. That, man, there must be some layers under there that are boiling over, that are attacking me. But it really isn't me. I'm just the object of their attack. But what's going on is this boiler room inside because of other things that they're dealing with within. Things that they faced growing up, things that they heard growing up, value that they see themselves as having or not having, has gotten them to this place that they're treating me like this. Man, Joseph, I want to be like him. I'm not yet, but I'd sure like to be. I'd like to be more understanding and more inquisitive and ask more questions of really wanting to know about a person and their past and their history and their place and their struggles and their battles. I really want to be able to have open conversations to find out more about family and family history and dynamics so I can get a better understanding for whatever the struggle is in your life and whatever struggle I'm having in mine. And then whatever struggle we're having perhaps together, if we just know that we all have warts and scars and pasts and layers and twists and turns and things that happened to us that were horrible. But let's not be horrible to one another. And so Joseph, in this chaos of a family, begins his journey then. Now he's a little older. He's not all that old. I mean, he's, teen. And remember now, his dad was old. His dad in our sort of culture would be in the grandfather age stage when Joseph was born. And that may have something to do with how Jacob had softened along the way. I mean, I find that the older I get, the softer I get. I'm not just talking about my midsection. And, we get softer as we get older. Something happens where that fight, just wanting to, let's go at it, just kind of fades away. And some of you folks who are a little older understand what I mean by that. It's just like, I don't have it in me to I don't want to go toe to toe anymore. I just want a hug or a nap or a snack. I don't want to fight. I don't want to fight. And so in this, and of course, Rachel's the favorite, and he must have seen his son Joseph. Jacob must have seen Joseph with all of his qualities and characteristics that stood out as different than the rest of the boys. So he gets this fancy coat. I mean, it's a coat of royalty. It's an expensive coat. Must have been a fine looking coat. One that really stood out. I wonder how the brothers felt about that. Well, let's find out. Chapter 37. Now Jacob lived in the land where his father had sojourned, the land of Canaan. These are the records of the generations of Jacob. Joseph, when 17 years of age, was pasturing the flock with his brothers while he was still a youth, along with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph brought back a bad report about them to their father. We do not know what the bad report was. We don't know, and let's not really speculate his motivation behind the bad report. I think sometimes we make a mistake in trying to infer what their motivation was when we don't know. He might have just been a person who recognized that things weren't going the way they should and that he respects the authority and the position of dad to be the overseer of the family business and came back and said, hey, Dad, things aren't quite going well there on the old pasture. And I'd like to think, at least, he's not trying to really narc them out. But he gives this bad report. Verse 3. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons because he was the son of his old age. And he made him a varying color tunic And his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and so they hated him and could not speak to him on friendly terms. How would this affect you? You've got 11 brothers. You've got a family. Your mom is dead. You've got a little teeny brother. Your dad is an old man. And when you go out to spend time with the family, all you get is grief? They didn't have one nice thing to say to him. That would break most people. But Joseph keeps showing up. There's some sort of inner strength, some sort of inner value, some sort of inner role, some sort of inner purpose that he must have seen, must have had, that goes beyond what I can even begin to imagine at this moment. But he must have had that as he goes to still try to do what he's called to do. Be part of the family. Serve. Be with his brothers. Do his work. Help. And so they're upset. Verse 4. From that point on, we find this. His brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, and so they hated him and could not speak to him on a friendly term. Verse 5. Then Joseph had a dream. Oh no. And when he told it to his brothers, they hated him even more. And he said to them, please listen to the dream which I have had. Wouldn't you be excited if you received a dream directly from God and it's a message from God? Wouldn't you want to share that with people? I mean, this is a special historical event. God is speaking to this guy through a dream. And the family should then go, wow, a message direct from the throne room of God? Joseph, this is awesome. Tell us what he said. And he said to them, please listen to this dream which I have had. For behold, we're binding sheaves in the field, and lo, my sheaf rose up, and also stood erect. And behold, your sheaves gathered around and bowed down to me. Then his brothers said to him, are you actually going to reign over us? Or are you really going to rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. Do you know one thing that the dream started to solidify in Joseph? He had a purpose. He had a role. He had value. He had a task to fulfill. He needed to get to the place and to the time, however God was going to work that out, to get to that place where then he would stand in a ruling position. And then his brothers would then be in this servant position. He needed to get to that place for their good. He didn't know why, he didn't know how, he didn't know what was going to happen, but he knew that that was part of his purpose and role. He then has another dream. Verse 9. And his other dream, and it related to his brothers. And he said, lo, I have still had another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were bowing down to me. And he related it to his father and his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have had? Shall I and your mother, should be mothers, and your brothers actually come to bow ourselves down before you to the ground? And his brothers were jealous of him. But his father kept the saying in his mind. We'll finish here with this. If I'm on this journey in life, and then I've got 11 brothers and they hate me, and then they hate me even more, and then they hate me even more, and then on top of that, now they're going to be jealous of me. But I know that I've received these messages from God, and there's some sort of plan that he wants me to unfold. But then in me then telling my family, to be moved to tell my family about what the message from God is, that they now hate me even more and treat me even more poorly. How do I justify that with God? I mean, isn't God then putting me in a situation where I'm taking even more abuse because of things that he's leading me to be a part of? How does that work? I mean, have you ever been into a place where you really think that your purpose and your role and the plan and the value that you had and whatever it is that you were a part of, whatever ministry, whatever life event that you were really working towards, and then you just get hit with one wave of negativity after the next, and people start treating you poorly and even more poorly, and jealousy then kicks in, and all of a sudden you're like, wait a second, man, why am I being mistreated to such a great level? What's going on? Man, God, what are you doing to me? Where are you at? Why aren't you protecting me? Why aren't you removing these things from me? Couldn't you imagine that would be some questions that maybe you've even asked along the way? Like, God, why are you allowing this to happen? Well, there's an answer to that question. And as for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good. You see, in the process of God working all things together for the good of those that love him and are called according to, oh, there's purpose. It is his purpose. And if we live a life following his purpose, we need to remember that there are times when people who are valued by him more than numbers can say, that he needs to have you in the midst of pain and mistreatment. He needs to, like Joseph, perhaps allow you for 23 years to be treated poorly, all to finally get that final result to save the world, as Joseph did. Don't think for one moment in the midst of mistreatment that God has abandoned you. Matter of fact, I'd like to suggest that he's trusting you. That he's trusting you with your love and endurance and purpose, that's his purpose and role, that's his role for you, to stay the course, to do what you've been called to do by him. And then in the midst of the mistreatment, he will then lead you to a place where you'll finally go, man, now I get it. You all meant that stuff to harm me, but God along the way intended everything that was bad to work out for good. And I know it's not easy. I'll read you one final verse. Do not grow weary of doing good. In due season, we will reap if we do not give up. Galatians chapter 6, verse 9. Don't give up. Don't quit. You may be facing some seasons of great difficulty and wondering why. You may have a sense of being devalued. Please don't. You may struggle with what your purpose and role is. Know that he has one for you because it is his purpose. And you may not fully understand what that is at the time, but don't quit. Stay the course and watch God with his timing work all things together. Oh, but Ted, 23 years sounds like a long time. It is here on earth, but in the scope of eternity, 23 years, not bad. And wouldn't it be worth it? I mean, to put 23 years of struggles in for the reward of saving a whole nation? And just so that you know, your value isn't any less than Joseph's. And that with your purpose and your role and your work that God has in store for you, saving people too. But you can't quit. I'm not going to. Are you? Good, you can't quit because you got marriage and polygamy stuff to teach. So you got. If there's anybody here tonight that is on the brink of quitting or struggling and having to bear some weight of difficulties, let's help you. Carry as much as we can to relieve some of that stress and weight from you. And we might have somebody who wants to be baptized into Christ tonight, and if that's the case, please come forward as we stand and sing.